So this is going to be a video for my intro to philosophy class, though it also could be used by my intro to ethics class. The idea of this video is to give a quick introduction to thought experiments in general. So thought experiments will be oh, hi kitty. Thought experiments will be something that we cover throughout this course. For all of the units, we're going to be going over relevant thought experiments. So I thought it would help to give a quick primer on what thought experiments are and what the purpose of using thought experiments is for the context of a philosophy course. So this first slide here, I'm showing you guys Aesop's Fables. So Aesop's Fables are some of the oldest children's stories. Aesop was alive in ancient Greece. So Socrates himself, the father of Western philosophy, he was apparently uh, making poetic renditions of Aesop's Fables on his deathbed. That was something he was doing even when sentenced to execution. That's how he spent his time. So these fables are ancient and possibly of philosophical significance. Um, in that, when we talk about Aesop's fables, we very famously ask the question, "What is the moral to the story?" So we read this short story. It's usually about an animal that finds itself in some situation or another. Um, a lot of these are famous, right? So there's the ants and the grasshopper. There's the fox and the grapes, or there's the tortoise and the hare. Those are Aesop's fables, right? And we ask, okay, what's the moral to any one of those stories? And when we ask that, we're sort of trying to ask, what does the story teach us? What can we get? Like, what nugget of wisdom can we get out of this story of this animal in this situation? So for those stories I just mentioned, we might have some obvious candidates for morals. So the ants and the grasshopper, that's the one where the ants work hard to prepare for winter, the grasshopper doesn't. The ants survive and the grasshopper doesn't. So what's the moral there? It's maybe something like hard work pays off. That might be the moral there. The tortoise and the hare. So the tortoise and the hare have a race. The hare gets a head start, gets a little bit like too confident, and it falls asleep, and then the tortoise ends up winning the race. We say slow and steady wins the race. That's a common saying. Uh, that's a common saying that we use as like the moral of that story. You might also identify the flaw of the hare there is maybe overconfidence, maybe. Because it seemed like the hare could have won if he wasn't overconfident. Or maybe the turtle's virtue is what? Stick-to-itiveness, something like that. The turtle just keeps going no matter what. He's just slow and steady, and he's gonna win the race, not because he's the fastest, but because he's just gonna put in a little bit of time over and over. So those are some stories that maybe we can glean these little bits of teaching from. And I think in a very wide sense, those are kinds of thought experiments. Stories are a kind of thought experiment. They're imagining a situation and then imagining sort of what are the consequences of that situation. So here's a more formal definition, maybe, of thought experiment. So what is a thought experiment? Well, in philosophy, an experiment we do in our minds. when we cannot do an equivalent experiment in the laboratory. So you can imagine that a scientist wants to know more about the world, so they do experiments in the laboratory. We can see here they've got the beakers, they're mixing different chemicals or whatever. But maybe sometimes we can't do that. Maybe all we've got is our mind and trying to think through concepts. For whatever reason, maybe we can't do it in the laboratory. So, number one, we may just not have a laboratory, right? We may not have the equipment and resources necessary to perform the experiment. That's fully possible. Scientists find themselves in that position, right? They have to get funding and such for their experiments. We also, though, there may be other reasons why we can't do the experiment. The experiment may be impossible, or the experiment may be immoral. So in cases like that, where we cannot physically do the experiment, or we cannot ethically do the experiment, we may have to be satisfied with doing it in our heads. So what could be an example of that? Well, imagine wanting to know how the Big Bang banged or whatever. Like, how did the universe start? We think it was a Big Bang. That seems to be consistent with like sort of like our astronomical evidence. Um, but but we can't really do that experiment. Well, so like think about that. Like we can't just set up a Big Bang in a beaker and set it off. Um, Presumably, that's impossible. We just don't have the amount of energy and resources required to do that, and I don't think we ever will. Like, wouldn't we have to like harness the energy of the whole universe to do that, and like Big Bang the universe? Might that be a requirement? Um, Also, we almost certainly can't do that ethically, right? Because if we did that, we would effectively be blowing up the universe. So we'd be blowing up ourselves. We wouldn't be alive to see the results anyway. So it would be sort of a futile thing to run that experiment in a laboratory. So what we could do though is we could imagine, and in our imagination see what is conceivable, see the options conceptually for what might have started the Big Bang. And that's sort of where philosophy is going to come to play in constructing thought experiments to test theories. Um, so we call philosophers like doing experiments from the armchair, because the idea is they sit in the armchair and they just think really hard, and they come to new ideas by doing that, as opposed to the scientist who maybe is in the lab coat in the laboratory with beakers and such. All right. I also have here this Latin phrase, ceteris paribus. You may have heard this in economics if you've taken an economics class. Ceteris paribus just means all else being equal. Um, the paribus is the equal, and the ceteris is the all else, right? But the idea of ceteris paribus is just holding some things constant while we change others. So in a lab, you might hold some variables constant. You might hold the temperature and the pressure and the humidity constant, but you might change like the volumes in your beakers, or the concentrations of the chemicals. You might change those things while holding the environment constant. You have the constant variables, and then you have the variables that you change. In thought experiments, you do the same thing. You imagine some things changing, but not others. So you tweak a few variables, but you leave all the other variables the same, and you see if anything, like you see what you can deduce from that, right? That's the basic idea. So let's get into some possible thought experiment examples here. So these are going to be general types of tests that we might want to run. So different thought experiments might fall into one of these categories or another. So here we have an identity test. So what's the question we're asking with an identity test? Can we imagine a world with P and not Q, or Q and not P? So can we imagine a world where P and Q are not identical, is what we're trying to ask there. So here's an example. Can a person be 6 feet tall and not 5'12", or vice versa, and at the same time? And the answer, I think we all know this, is no. Those are identical things. So a 6 foot tall person, that is a 5'12" person. That's just what inches and feet mean. 12 inches is a foot. So 5'12", that is the same thing as 6 foot tall. So that's an identity test. Those things can't be different because they are the same, like that they are identical. So that's something we could ask, is whether things are identical or not. Another thing you could ask is a possibility test. So here's a question of possibility. Can we imagine a world with both P and Q? So in this case, we can imagine the example, can a person be 6 feet tall and make 6 figures at the same time? So maybe P is being 6 feet tall, maybe Q is making 6 figures. So those are the two variables, P and Q, and that's what they represent, 6 feet tall and 6 figures. Can they be? Can a person do that? Well, yeah. There are examples of people who are 6 feet tall and make 6 figures. That's a probably not a common thing to be, but it certainly does exist. There are such people in the world, so it is possible. So we've by finding an example of a person like that, we've proved its possibility, right? So next one, a necessity or sufficiency test. So for this one, we can ask the question, can we imagine a world with P but not Q? So what's an example here? So can a person be 6 feet tall and not greater than 5'11" at the same time? So notice, unlike 6 feet tall and 5'12", 6 feet tall and greater than 5'11" are not identical. But the answer here is that they can't be 6 feet tall and not greater than 5'11". So why is that? Well, 6 feet tall is sufficient for being greater than 5'11". If you're 6 feet tall, that's enough to be greater than 5'11", right? And you could restate this as being greater than 5'11" is necessary for being 6 feet tall. So you have to be 6 feet tall, or rather, you have to be greater than 5'11". It's required that you're greater than 5'11" if you are 6 feet tall. So we can see how, even though those aren't identical, one of them might imply the other, either as a necessary or sufficient condition. So a thought experiment can test that. We can ask that question, and we can test whether things are indeed necessary or sufficient for each other. Another test, a difference test. So here we have, if A changes, ceteris paribus, all else being equal, does B also change? So an example, if they turn out to be 5'11" and not 6, do we swipe left, not right? So in this example, the difference is we're changing 1 inch, right? We're changing 1 inch and we're seeing a difference in swiping. So A, the variable A, is that 1 inch, difference, the height, right? And the B, variable B, is the direction of swipe. So we either have a change in direction of swipe or not a change in direction of swipe, right? All right. And the answer here is, well, maybe if it makes a difference. So if that 1 inch matters to the person who's swiping, maybe it does make a difference. So maybe they do change their behavior. Maybe for the 6 they swipe right. Maybe for the 511 they swipe left. And we can similarly propose an indifference test. So we can say if A changes, ceteris paribus, all else being equal, does B stay the same? So same example, kind of, but we're asking not if they changed, but if they kept to their answer. So if they turn out to be 511, not 6, do we swipe right anyway? And the answer is maybe if we're indifferent. So if that 1 inch doesn't matter to us, we're indifferent to it, our behavior will not change if it changes, then we've sort of demonstrated our indifference by running this test, right? All right. So what's the point? What's the point of going through these tests? These tests are going to be types that our thought experiments fall into. In philosophy, we're interested in definitions, which makes us interested in things like identity. We're also interested in implications. So necessary and sufficient conditions for things are going to be important. Also, we're interested in what changes what. What's the difference that we can observe when we change one variable? Do we observe any difference? Or do we observe a difference? We're also interested in possibility. What is possible, what's not? What can we even conceive of as plausibly existing? What can't we conceive of as plausibly existing? We're interested in questions like that. So we will we'll be going through various thought experiments in the class for all the different units: epistemology, metaphysics, theories of mind, theories of value. We'll be doing thought experiments, and they will come in different shapes and sizes. They'll have different implications, but many of them will fall into one of these types of test or another. Basically, to try to figure out what theories are right and wrong. That's the goal, right? To figure out what we should believe. And so these thought experiments are going to give us reasons to believe certain theories over others, or reasons to disbelieve certain theories over others. And we'll take them one at a time, but I hope this has helped to give you a general idea of what we're trying to do when we look at these thought experiments in this class.